Alrighty, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming along tonight to talk about the Town of Gawler's boundary reform proposal. My name is Nicole Halsey and I'm from a company called URPS, and I'll be facilitating tonight's meeting. I'd like to acknowledge that tonight we meet on the land of the Kaurna people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So a couple of housekeeping matters to get us underway. First of all, if you could pop your phones on silent, that would be wonderful. Obviously, if you need to take a call, something comes up, feel free to just step out into the hallway there. The toilets are off the hallway in which you entered to the left, and then there's also some back around to the right in the community centre itself. In an emergency, we will hear some form of sound, but essentially we'll exit out of these doors to my left out onto the green space outside. I will have you out of here by 9. We're scheduled to finish by 9. We might get a few early minutes depending on how things go, but we'll wrap up at around 9 o'clock tonight. Obviously as well, you would all be aware we're operating within a COVID-19 environment, so just ask people to observe the general rules around coughing and sneezing into your elbow. There's hand sanitizer around the room. Just please maintain some distance between yourselves and others in the room as well. So what do we have ahead of us tonight? Tonight, really, we've got 3 presentations. They're fairly short because most of the night is really to hand over to all of you and answer any questions or queries you might have about the proposal. So in a moment, we're going to hear from our 3 speakers. We've got Mayor Karen Redmond, we've got the Chief Executive of the Town of Gawler, Henry Inner, and we've also got Alex Hart from the Office for Local Government. So they'll each go through a fairly short presentation, but then it's really around to a panel sort of Q&A type session, which I'll facilitate. My job is really just to make sure everyone gets the opportunity to ask the questions and find out the answers that they'd like to enable them to participate in the consultation process. Towards the end of tonight, I'll tell you a bit more about how to further provide your comments about the Town of Gawler proposal, but hopefully tonight you'll be able to find out that information that helps you understand more about the proposal itself and perhaps where you sit on that idea moving forward. A couple of other things. We are recording tonight's session. There's a camera at the back. Tonight's session, along with last week's, which was held sort of last Monday night, same time, same place, that's also available on Council's website. If there are questions tonight that our panellists or people in the room can't answer, we will take them on notice, and people who've registered via Eventbrite will email those answers back to you, as well as make them available on the website. All right. Without much further ado, then I will hand over to Mayor Karen Redmond to get us started. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We've got a full house almost tonight. So firstly, I'd also like to acknowledge that we meet on Kaurna land. The Kaurna people are special to Gawler. Where we're standing and where we're sitting tonight is the meeting of the 2 rivers, or just to my right. And it is a very spiritual place for Aboriginal people. So thank you everyone for coming. I'd just like to acknowledge some special people in the room. We have the Mayor of Barossa here tonight, Mayor Bim Lange. Welcome, Bim, with his arms folded. Nice. You're getting into the mood. Awesome. That's great. Elected members, there are some elected members here from the Town of Gawler. I welcome you this evening as well. And also everybody else, all of you who've come here, both residents of Gawler, ratepayers of Gawler, but people who are interested in this subject. So I'd like to talk a little bit about a strong community and what that means. We know that Gawler is an established community with strong links to history. It was established in 1839, and even before that time, Aboriginal people have been gathering here for thousands of years. So it's a known meeting place and, what you could argue, a regional centre. We have long-term residents, some of whom are here this evening. We're close to Adelaide with great transport links, although not for the next 12 months because our train is going to be stopped, isn't it? We engage in public debate, and we do that in a lively manner. And when there's a natural disaster, we fall over ourselves to help each other. To me, that reflects a really strong community. We are known as a regional centre for all aspects of community life. We have a wealth of services that we enjoy as residents and visitors alike. Back in the 1950s, community groups, family groups, built and managed community assets. And I can think of one such asset, which is the Gawler Pool, built and managed by families in Gawler until council took that over. Over time, with affluence, more risk, legislation, a changing social landscape, well, we now pay taxes and expect government to manage most services. Most of us are happy to pay our taxes, knowing that we receive pretty impressive services. For example, free healthcare. It's enormously expensive to provide healthcare, so we pay tax to ensure we have access. And I can tell you there's not many countries in the world that provide what we enjoy. We're very fortunate, but we pay to get that service. Free libraries, the one card system that is the envy of our colleagues in the eastern states. Only in South Australia do you have the one card system. We have subsidised entry to public swimming pools. Our rates pay for the majority of the services that are provided in our town by council. The pool, our ovals, the building that we're in right now. Our playgrounds, we have 26 of them. Our footpaths, and we continue to build more because we are an old town. Our roads, and the list goes on. That's what a tax is. It allows an entity such as a council to make decisions on how those taxes are spent for the benefit of all. So back to a strong community. Communities all share in the benefits of services and everything to enjoy about a place like Gawler. We should never think that this will always be the case, however. We've got to work at it. And part of that is planning for our future. Equally, we all need to contribute to ensure our community stays strong. This contribution might be volunteering, being on a committee, helping out at our local school, and in relation to council, it's paying rates if you're a landholder. No one likes paying tax, I don't. None of us in this room like paying tax, do we? But I'm sure we all enjoy the wealth of services and facilities here in Gawler. It makes sense then, if you're a part of a community, that you expect your rates to be used for your community and not somewhere else. And not just your street or suburb, but collectively right across the community. The boundary reform proposal is based on social equity, sharing the responsibility so we all gain as a community. Again, contributing to our collective strength. As we grow over the next few years, this shared responsibility will be important to ensure our service delivery is not adversely affected by the growth. Efficient and effective delivery of services by one council rather than three makes complete sense for Gawler and the areas identified in this proposal. Last week, we heard about the boundary reform process from Alex Hart, who's here with us once again, and welcome, Alex. And I'll leave it to Alex to again walk us through this careful process if we choose as a council to pursue it. We also heard last week that when we went through a boundary reform process in 1985, a much needed and overdue library redevelopment was the outcome. We heard from people that were worried about the cost of their rates if Gawler was their council. Again, I go back to my previous point that we all share in the benefits, so it's only fair and reasonable that we all contribute. Also, I think it's important to add that rate policies are reviewed every year. And our CEO, Henry Innett, last week, also made mention of a broad-ranging review which would be triggered if boundary reform became a reality. This includes not only rates, but representation, so we all get a say going forward. Change is constant. We can't avoid it, As much as we would like things to stay the same, it just isn't realistic. Since 1985, we've experienced large amounts of growth, mainly along our perimeter. Growth brings wealth, but also challenges. These newer areas are very much a part of our community. Local government has a core responsibility to strategically plan for our future, and this boundary reform proposal, in our view, does just that, plan for Gawler's future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Redman. Now, folks, I am going to ask us just to hold our questions because, as I mentioned earlier, we've only got about another 10 minutes or so of presentations before I hand over to you. So I'm now going to ask Alex Hart to come up to the podium. And Alex, I'll just get you the clicker. Alex is from the Office for Local Government. While Alex gets settled, I will just also invite you throughout the evening to feel free to jot down any points you might have around the proposal, what you like, what you don't dislike, what you don't like. I know people were given a post-it note, a couple of post-it notes as you came in. Feel free to jot down anything on those and add them to our wall posters before you leave tonight. If anyone needs more post-it notes, we've got plenty on hand. But now that you're ready, Alex, I'll hand over to you and help us understand the Boundary Commission's role in this and what this process looks like moving forward. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Mayor Redman, for your welcome and your invitation to join you tonight. As Nicole said, my name is Alex Hart. I'm from the Office of Local Government, which is in state government, and one of our jobs is to support the South Australian Local Government Boundaries Commission, whose role it is to consider proposals for council changes to council boundaries that may come to it. I should say at the outset that my job here tonight is to explain the Commission's process and answer any questions that you have about how the Commission does that role. I would ask you to understand that my representation of the Commission is not a comment on Gawler's proposal at this stage, that the Commission won't have any views on that until such time as they receive it and consider it. So it really is just to talk about that process so that there's an understanding of how things will proceed if Gawler chooses to go ahead. Now, the Commission itself is actually the same people that undertake the role as the Local Government Grants Commission. It's a 3-person board. The members are Bruce Green as the chair. He's a former mayor of Port Lincoln Council. Wendy Campana is a former chief executive officer of the Local Government Association. And our third member, probably known to many of you in the room, is Dave Burgess, who's the current mayor of Mid-Murray Council. The Commission is what we call a statutory authority. That means that it operates under its own legislation that sets it up to be a very independent body. It does the job that it's assigned under its legislation, under its own guidelines, and in doing so, it's not subject to direction from the Minister. I am now going to show you this probably fairly horrific flowchart. Please don't worry too much about it, but overall it's an explanation of how the Commission considers any proposals to boundary change that may come to it. There's a huge variety of boundary change proposals that can come to the Commission, and this diagram explains the lot. I won't do that. I will just focus on the parts of it that are relevant to the proposal that Gawler Council is considering. You can see that there are 2 columns here. That's for what we call administrative and general proposals. Administrative proposals are boundary changes that might be necessary to move a boundary out of a backyard, move it from the middle of the road to an edge of a road, or something that might be connected to a development approval. So that's a fairly straightforward process. General proposals are ones with more significance. So pretty clearly, this kind of proposal was considered to be a general proposal, and that's the boxes on the right-hand side here. At the moment with the Gawler proposal, we are right at the top in that green box at the top. In fact, we're not even formally there yet. At that point in the green box, the council prepares the proposal and sends it into the Commission for their consideration. The Commission has released a lot of guidelines which explain how it undertakes its role. One of those guidelines explains to councils who are thinking about doing this how they put that proposal in. And what the Commission has established there is a 2-part process, which is stage 1, where councils or other proponents tell the Commission what they're thinking of, so that they can get some early advice from the Commission as to whether the proposal is likely to proceed. when the Commission's considering proposals, it doesn't have an entirely free hand. It has to look at the proposal within the context of what we call the Section 26 principles, because they're in Section 26 of the Local Government Act, that describe the types of things that the Commission must have in mind when it's considering a boundary proposal. So stage one is an opportunity for the Commission to understand what a council might be considering doing and provide some advice back to the council in the context of those principles and other things. If the council then chooses, it proceeds to stage two, which is actually the formal submittal of a general proposal to the Commission. And that's the point at which Gawler Council is now at, as I understand it, and I don't wish to speak for Mayor Edmund or Henry, but considering whether to take that next step and submit the proposal for the Commission's consideration. If that's the case, we'll go into that purple diamond underneath the green box. At that point, the Commission's role is to make a decision as to whether it will investigate the proposal. I think there's a common view that once the council, or if the council makes a proposal, the Commission then says yes or no to that proposal. That's not quite right. The Commission will decide whether it will investigate it or not. And if it decides that it's worth investigating, it will then undertake its own independent investigation of what is proposed, so at the end of this process it can make recommendations to the Minister. That means that the Commission will do its own community engagement with all councils and all affected areas. Affected areas, of course, areas that are proposed to be moved, areas, people within the council that would lose that area, and people within the council that would gain that area. They would also have to do a full investigation of the impact of the change, both for the council that has proposed to receive the area and the proposal, how the proposal would affect the area that may relinquish it. And that can include a wide range of matters. When the Commission is doing that, if that gets to that point, they will appoint some investigators with areas of expertise that are relevant to the proposal that's in front of them. That's really the most critically important part of this process. I think, as I said, there is a perception that the Commission's role is simply to say yes or no to what gets put in front of it, but that's not the case. It must do its own investigation to satisfy itself that it understands all of those points that then will form the basis of recommendations it will make to the Minister at the end of that process. At that point, we're right down to the blue one in the middle there. The Minister would receive that report, which would be published along with the recommendations so that they are publicly available. Everybody would be aware of what the Commission has recommended to the Minister, and the Minister would then make a call. I should note that those recommendations, again, don't have to be a simple yes or no to what has been put in front of the Commission, that they can make recommendations that vary from that proposal if they think that that would create a better result for the communities in question and their councils. The Minister then receives those recommendations and makes her own call, the moment as to whether they would proceed or not. If she does not make a recommendation to the Governor to make a proclamation that reflects that, she must make a report to Parliament so that those reasons for disagreeing with the Commission again are made very public. The other element that I will briefly note on my way through is the proclamation, which is a technical term for a notice that gets published in the Government Gazette. It can encompass a wide range of things. That would be, if it came to a boundary change, that would be the notice that makes it official. But that proclamation can be quite detailed and deal with a number of matters that might relate to the change of area from one council to another, such as, how rates are dealt with for the first few years, transfer of assets, any other matter that might be relevant to that move to make that happen in a way that's effective and has the best result for the councils and the community. So if you hear me talk about a proclamation at the end, as you ask me the questions over the course of the evening, that's what I'm referring to there. So in a nutshell, that's the process. As Nicole said, I am here to answer questions about the process, and I can tell you I got quite a few last week, so I'm sure that I'll get some more tonight. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks very much, Alex. And I should probably pay special note that Alex is actually on annual leave and has come back to join us again tonight, which is excellent, because if I know there's some people who were here last week, she's a fountain of knowledge about the process, which is really important to understand moving through this proposal. Henry, over to you. Do you have a slide? I can't recall. No, you're good.
Right, thanks for that. Thank you, Alex. Yes, my name's Henry Innett. I'm the Chief Executive for the town of Gawler. So further to the presentations already given, from an organisational perspective and administration perspective, what the whole topic of boundary reform presents is an opportunity for the administration, for the elected member body to be in a position of strength relative to growth here at the town of Gull over the coming decades. It is very much about the communities of interest. It's about what we actually already do today when we plan for township expansion, when we plan for road network upgrades, when we look at stormwater management, when we look at community services. It's all about the communities of interest. And we're duty bound to have regard to those communities that do come to Gawler, that do come and use our facilities. Those communities are not just within the town of Gawler boundaries, but are very much a part of that broader catchment. We actually serve a broader region of about 100,000 people. But in terms of the immediate communities, it's in those areas that we've identified. And so over the years, when we've planned for particular elements of our community and growth and demand, again, we've had regard to those broader communities of interest. Currently, we're working through and focusing on sport and rec. We're working on 2 master plans, one at Carbethan and one through this particular precinct here, right from the swimming centre, right around the river network and over to this part of the precinct. And that, again, is very much about future population, demographics, sporting interests, and where we as the administrative body have then a responsibility with the elected members to have regard for those future projections. If not this week, it might be next week, we're actually launching our consultation process on our community plan. That's our most strategic council document that seeks to present the future aspirations of council in the community over the next couple of decades, Gawler 2030. And again, that's having close regard to the populations, the communities that not only fall within our council boundary, but are within the catchment of Gawler and the communities of interest of Gawler. And we are just duty bound to have regard to all those elements. In terms of the best way to manage the growth of Gawler, the best way to provide council facilities and services to be the most efficient and the most effective, as Mayor Redmond mentioned, we present the proposition that it's not 3 councils that can do that the best, but one. And that one council should be the town of Gawler. It makes good sense from a community services perspective, and it makes good sense from a planning, development and a economic perspective. So we can see strong economic, social and environmental reasons for presenting the submission to the South Australian Boundaries Commission. It makes good community and economic sense to adjust the boundaries to future-proof Gawler. So with that, Nicole, I'll leave it at that and I'm sure we'll get into some questions.
Great, thanks, Henry. All righty, so we've heard some initial information to set the scene. I'm sure people have got questions. If you wouldn't mind popping your hand up, I've got Paul on the microphone and he'll come to you. I just ask you not to touch it just for COVID safe purposes, so he'll hold that for you. But it'd be great if you are asking a question, if you wouldn't mind just saying your name and perhaps if you're happy where you're from. Who would like to kick us off? Who would like to open us up with a question? Lovely, thank you. Paul's just coming with the microphone.
Wanted to touch it. I'm here to support Council's proposal. I'm here to support it to the next stage. It's something I've been pushing for some time. I'm a resident in Gawler Central, but I've also lived out at Calbeeba, out at Gawler Belt and Concordia. And I've been in this area for 50 years, raised my family, my children, and a businessman and lawyer. I've seriously looked at the Act. I've proposed this sort of thing previously. I'm in support of it. My question is, the area of Brookveld and the Gawler gliding field, commonly known as a Gawler gliding field, is in the area of light at the moment. Now, those of us on the ground know that the gliding field has a very short lease prospect. People who are putting up new hangars there are being told don't expect a renewal. The rumour is that Light Council has plans for that to turn it into some sort of light industrial or shopping centre area. In my view, well, my question is, has Council considered that Brookveld and Gawler airfield area? That's my only question.
Thanks very much. So is that area has it been considered for inclusion in the boundary reform proposal? Henry, is that something you can comment on?
Just to clarify, if the area is not shown within the plans as presented, then no. However, this consultation process is about seeking suggestions where areas should be further considered. It's important that we drew a boundary. We think that the area that we've identified is that right composition relative to boundary considerations, but these are all open to feedback from the community and further consideration.
Thanks, Henry. I've just had a request for the map to go back up, if that's okay. I just have lost, there we go. There's also, folks, if you want to get up, feel free. Over on the side, there are A4s of each of the separate areas that are proposed for inclusion or not, or removal. So feel free if you want to get some more detailed blow-ups of those areas. Other questions or clarifications over here? Thanks, Paul.
Hi, I'm Cody from the town of Gawler. So my question is just a clarification around the process. When the minister decides, is it one big decision on the proposal as a whole, or is each suburb being considered separately? Because obviously some of these are much more controversial than others. Some of them, the council's concerned, don't really care at all or think it's a good idea for it to change, whereas others are more controversial. So is that going to be decided case by case?
Alex, do you want to clarify that one?
Very happy to. It will depend on what the Commission's report includes and the recommendations it will make to the Minister at the end of the process. So just to reiterate the process, if a proposal comes in, the Commission will make a decision whether to investigate it or not. If it chooses to investigate it, that will duly take place, and that can be quite a detailed piece of work if it's a substantial proposal. And then it makes a report to the Minister, including recommendations, which is published. So those recommendations could certainly contemplate a scenario where some boundary changes are made immediately. They may make a call that, and I don't want to make this sound like a comment on the Gawler proposal, because I am just talking in general terms about the process. If a proposal had, for example, 6 boundary changes, the Commission could recommend that 4 proceed and 2 don't, for example. Or it could make specific recommendations about the proclamation of those changes and suggest that in certain parts of those areas that additional time or other mechanisms are used to transfer one area to the other. So for example, not much boundary change has happened in council areas in South Australia since councils were amalgamated back in the late 90s. One that did happen very soon after that process was the suburb of Skye in eastern Adelaide. And I believe that actually happened over about a 5-year period to transfer completely from the Adelaide Hills Council to the Burnside Council. So that's certainly within the Commission's ability to make recommendations not only about the change, but also about how a change should proceed.
Thanks, Alex. Other questions? Thank you. Thanks, Paul.
Hi, thank you. It's Shirley Humphrey from Calbeeba. My husband and I moved to there back in '96, and it feels like that we have been forever embargoed with Gawler wanting to take our area over. I know Gawler acquired Barossa land in 1984 from Cheek Avenue to Sunnydale. Looking the video last week, I think it was Helen who made a comment that at that stage the other areas didn't exist. True, Hewitt didn't exist, but Calbeeba from Sunnydale through to Calbeeba Road was actually there at that stage. Now, once that land has been developed, we have been inundated with Gawler forever pushing, using the same arguments. You're part of a Gawler community, you should be part of our council area. We've continued to come out and say, no, we want to stay Barossa. I know in the beginning of 2000, the Gawler Council came out with a Section 30 review. In that review, they actually showed for housing development to occur from Calbeeba to Sandy Creek, and also pushed for a house and urban development at Concordia. Barossa Council came out very strongly against that, making comments to the fact that they did not want development in that area under any circumstances. The Gawler Council then went on to do an MOU with the then Labor government. Within that MOU, they actually asked for the government to investigate urban development and transport for Concordia, and also to look at putting it within the urban area. Now, back in 2007, at that stage, the planning minister was under pressure to look at the Gawler East area for a DPO for rezoning, and at the same time was looking at enlarging the area of the urban boundary. One of their documents actually shows that they took note of the fact of the MOU was still current, and they included Concordia within the urban boundary. Then Gawler comes out saying, well, that's going to affect us, it should come to us. Barossa has always said, no, it shouldn't be developed. My one question is it normal for one council to propose development in the next council?
It's normal for council and proper for council to consider where it sits in the state government's thinking on planning and growth. And it's normal for a council to suggest whether that growth is positive or negative. As I understand it, the town of Gawler was actually opposed to the rezoning of Gawler East. In terms of the Concordia land, all I can say is that more recently, the developer has been strongly advocating that that Concordia is part of Gawler and will form a natural extension of Gawler, as opposed to forming a natural extension of any part of the Barossa. And with that will come 20,000 people. And it's fair and reasonable that the town of Gawler has an important role to play in how that development occurs and how it integrates with the rest of the Gawler community.
Thanks, Henry. Other questions or clarifications? Thanks very much, Paul. I was going to say that was going to be a very early minute if we didn't have any more. I'm sure there's more in the room. Fire away.
Chris Law-Smith from Calbeeba. Question for Alex, please. What do you, or are the powers of the minister laid down in the Act? The new legislation, the 2019?
Yes, they are. For those of you who like reading the legislation, just peering to see if you would find it in section 31 is the relevant section. So that sort of spells out the process for the Commission's role, and then the transfer of the report to the Minister, and then the Minister's obligations under that section. I can tell you, as you quite rightly note, this is very new legislation. It went through Parliament in 2017, but then didn't commence until 1st of January 2019, because there was a view when it went through Parliament that it wasn't a good idea to commence this particular piece of legislation in a year that had both state and local government elections in it. So it did only start on the 1st of November 2019. That is when the Boundaries Commission came into its formal existence. When we were developing the legislation, the Minister at the time, and this was supported by all parties involved in the process, were very careful and very clear that they wanted the Commission to be as independent as possible. So that when the Commission is undertaking its role, The minister cannot direct the commission whether or not to accept a proposal. It can't tell the commission, the minister can't tell the commission how to investigate a proposal. Once the commission's made its report, the minister can request the commission to consider certain matters. When the minister receives that report, it's up to the commission whether and how they do so. And again, that request must be made public so that it's clear that the minister has requested that prior to making his or her call on the recommendations that have come from the commission. And as I said earlier, if the minister decides not to implement recommendations from the commission, then the minister must make a report to Parliament on why that may be the case. So yeah, the commission itself has, it has a very independent role. I think I mentioned on the way through that it does publish its own guidelines on how it undertakes its process. And again, the commission does that. And that was quite deliberate. We didn't even make them regulations for the legislative folk in the room, so that the commission had its own ability to determine what would be in those.
Thanks, Alex. I'll go here and then I'll come to you, Margaret. We'll go over here first. Thanks, Paul.
I'm Bronwyn Lamont. I'm a resident of Gawler and I very much support the boundary reform. To Alex, I know some people of Gawler and maybe some councillors are a bit concerned about the cost. So if you're employed by the state government, why are we paying you to do your job and what are we paying for?
Thanks, that's a good question. I will presume here we're talking about the cost of progressing a proposal. I don't want to spend too long talking about history, but one of the things that this legislation did that came in 2019 was it established a process where a single council could put a proposal in front of the commission for consideration of a boundary reform. I should note that we are currently the only jurisdiction in Australia that allows that. It's quite an unusual thing to have happen. It was done because there was a strong view that councils who were interested in pursuing boundary reform should have the capacity to do so, have the opportunity to put that matter before the commission for their consideration. Obviously, depending on the proposal, that can be quite a significant task. And the investigation of the proposal would be, depending on how big it is, it can be quite small. Some of those smaller proposals we may well do in-house, but for a more substantial proposal, you would really need to get expert advice on a range of matters that would be applicable to that proposal. So the government's view at the time, and as was accepted by Parliament when the legislation was passed, was if councils have the opportunity to put these proposals to the Commission, then they also have the responsibility to cover the cost of that investigation. Having said that, there's not an expectation that when a council, if it does make a decision to put a proposal to the Commission, it sends it in with a blank cheque. So the process is that the council who's interested in making the proposal, if it decides to do so, submits the proposal. We also recognise that this kind of work that we're here to talk about tonight can be a job in itself, hence the two-stage process, so that if a council has a bit of the wrong end of the stick, that it hears that from the Commission at an early stage, so it doesn't spend a lot of time and resources in developing up a proposal to go to the Commission. But when the proposal goes in, if the Commission determines that yes, it's worth investigating, the Commission then has a responsibility to provide an estimate of the cost of the investigation back to the Council, so the Council can make the final decision whether to proceed with it or not. Just so that that decision is made in the awareness of how much that investigation might cost.
Thanks, Alex. Margaret was waiting over here. Thanks, Paul. Margaret, can you just pop your hand up? Paul's come here.
Yes, Margaret from Calbeaver, and I'm in the Barossa Council. Now, we've just heard tonight about you're good at planning development, you work with developers and so forth. So Springwood is in Gawler Council, am I correct? And you talk about all the costs that all these suburbs around the area costing Gawler because we're all coming in. Now, I've found some documentation. In Calbeeba, the drainage in particular, there was never a drainage problem until Springwood was developed. And in the budget on the Barossa Council, it says James Sims Court, Calbeeba drainage, $270,000. Now that's been caused by Springwood, I should say. And about 2 months ago, the Barossa Council laid down bitumen road, new bitumen road from Sunnydale Road all the way up to Balmoral. It's all ripped up by Springwood. So when you say there's costs that we're incurring, what about all the costs that Gawler's cost all the other councils?
Council deals with developers and the Springwood developers in a very constructive, professional manner, and there's always interface issues with the existing communities, existing roads. We have a constructive relationship with Springwood, but we're here to protect the Gawler community's interests. And sometimes those conversations result in certain decisions that the developers aren't happy with and certain decisions that council aren't happy with. But overall, it's about collectively working together. In terms of that particular road and the timing of when the road was sealed and then it was ripped up to then allow for some new infrastructure, I can't really comment on that insofar as to say that that was a Barossa Council matter. They were dealing with a developer. And it's probably a good example of how having two councils closely involved with one development, but then having different results, it's something that can be better managed. And we suggest that in terms of Gawler East, in terms of Springwood, in terms of Calbeeba, that should be part of the Gawler Council. We have correspondence from the Barossa Council suggesting that should be part of our boundary reform consideration. So in terms of that part of the conversation, the Barossa Council have indicated that they are supportive of that area of Barossa being part of Gawler. They're certainly not as supportive about Concordia, but that's a conversation that's still sort of ongoing.
Sorry, Margaret, did you have a follow-up question?
I know the Mayor from Barossa Council's here. I'm just wondering if he'd like to confirm that.
I wouldn't want to put the mayor on the spot, but if you're open to talking, that's up to you. I might throw to the floor. You're comfortable?
That's up to the Mayor of Gawler. I haven't come here to
No, absolutely, and I totally agree. But if you did want to say something in response to that question, you may. It's up to you.
look as far as Springwood development.
I'll get you the microphone, Mayor. You don't have to talk specifics. It's up to you if you had anything you want to add to the discussion.
No, I don't have a problem with that. I guess it's important that people sort of get the background behind what the question, and in fairness to the Mayor and Henry, a lot of the discussion around Springwood was well before their time being here. I was involved as the Director of Works and Engineering, and the outfall from the stormwater was always a significant concern, which the Barossa Council had raised with the Gawler Council over a number of years and wanted to look at that fallout and to make sure it was adequately catered for as part of a developer's costs. We've worked through that collectively. We have allocated funds to try to rectify that. And I think Henry made mention of the Barossa Council happy to hand over. It was a small piece of Springwood. It wasn't Calbeeba in the true sense, just to clarify you, Henry, because the understanding I got with your explanation there was there was a small part of the Barossa Council which was part of the Springwood development, and that was the piece that we agreed fitted best in the Gawler Council. At no stage did we ever agree to Calbeeba coming into the Gawler Council. I just wanted to clarify that point. And I guess the other point that I probably will follow up tomorrow was the comment that the Concordia developers want to be part of Gawler. That is interesting. We'll follow up with him because our meetings are they want to be very much part of the Barossa brand. But and just to talk about the bitumen, because I think that's important. The Barossa Council was led to believe some of the further stages were some years down the track. And rightly or wrongly, our asset people felt that that needed to be rejuvenated. And then we got word after that the stages have come forward quite rapidly because of the growth. And that's how that's come about.
Thanks, Mayor, for responding to some of those things. And I'll just make a point, Alex, or ask a question, Alex. Down the track, of course, as part of this process, the other councils are very much engaged by the Commission in terms of these discussions, aren't they? At the moment, it's really around the town of Gawler deciding whether or not to pursue the proposal as a community. Is that right?
That's correct. So Gawler's role at the moment is to consider whether it does go ahead with making that proposal. If it is made, it's accepted by the Commission and then investigated, the Commission has particular obligations around engagement with affected councils. They have a legislative obligation, not only, and of course their own desire to make good recommendations to the Minister. And part of that is, as I said earlier, understanding the effect of a boundary change on all of the councils that are affected, and also understanding the views of all of the affected communities, which is, of course, people who live in the area that's proposed to be moved, but also people who live in the area of the council from which it may move or the council from which it will move into. So that's a really critically important part of its job. It's also really important that the Commission does that itself because it has no skin in this particular game. Only the need and the desire to make good quality recommendations to the Minister. So it will have its own independent assessment of all of these aspects of how the communities operate, how services are provided, all of those different aspects that make up a council's operations and functions, to make a call within its own understanding and knowledge of those.
Thanks, Alex. Other questions? We'll just come here. Thanks, Paul. This gentleman.
G'day. I live in Gawler Belt and I'm on a 5 acres with a rural rating. I just wonder, under this proposal, is that going to stay like that or is it going to go up, and are my council rates going to go up under this proposal? Also, I'd just like to know, Hewitt hasn't been there maybe 30 years. Why didn't the council look at the shape and take it on back then when it was just empty land?
I'll answer the Hewitt question and I'll leave the rating question to you. And maybe you, Alex, because you mentioned about recommendations that might include comment or recommendations around rating. So the Hewitt question, before Hewitt was developed, and it was before my time, before Henry's time, and I think maybe before your time, Alex, council did propose to take on Hewitt. It was opposed by the sitting member at the time, Malcolm Buckby. So council, and we have a sitting elected member, Paul Little, who was on council at that time, and he remembers clearly, and he's mentioned it at several council meetings, that council in fact did support Hewitt becoming part of Gawler before any of it was developed. The local member opposed it. I think Light Council opposed it. I think there was also talk of amalgamation of Light and Malala, but the then mayor of Light, who's in fact a cousin of mine, Dennis Shanahan, he rightly opposed that as well. So there were lots of discussion, lots of debate, and it ended up that Hewitt was in Light. So I think the comments around the fact that council never opposed it are incorrect, but it's all about the debate as well, isn't it? So I'll hand over to Henry to talk about rating.
Thank you. So in terms of rates and rates between one council and another, if you were to take the average residential valuation in light regional councils, $350,000 compared to an average residential valuation in Gawler of 320, the difference there is about $10, just less than $10. We have done some initial calculations on if we were to look at a property of $450,000 in one council area and another, and what the rate in the dollar would be relative to any population adjustment. And that adjustment would need to be relative to both the rate in the dollar, and then the consequence of that is that there would be a slight increase in the rates from a property in light regional, where again, if we're looking at a property of about $450,000, we're looking about $100 difference. Yes. However, that does take into account that as part of any adjustment in rates, that council would want to make sure that that transition, should it occur, is a fair and reasonable transition, and that any spikes or otherwise in valuations is accommodated for over, again, a reasonable period of time. So yes, there is a variation from one council area to another, but we would otherwise take into account the valuation in the dollar that's then applied relative to the budgets that we prepare in terms of the services and otherwise that we're providing.
How long would that transition period last? And my question was about the rural rate that was going to remain when Gull takes over. A rural rate.
Hang on. Sorry, that's better. I know Mayor Redmond just asked me to perhaps address this through my process lens. If it becomes to a point where an area is proposed to be transferred, the proclamation that puts that into effect can provide for a period of time in which differential rates are provided to that area to allow for a transition from one rate to another. So that is something that could be officially dealt with. If the Commission decides that that area should move and makes a recommendation to the Minister that's accepted.
What if they don't? And then the rate goes up the next year.
So I think then you're really asking a question about how is this matter considered by the Commission when they're considering whether an area should move or not. Obviously a lot of people's views about a boundary change are going to be quite reasonably affected by the impact that it might have on their own rates bill. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. When the Commission is making a call about whether an area should move from one council to the next, it would, I think, consider that issue, but it would not necessarily be the driving factor of the decision. So the Commission would be having a look at a huge range of things, and that would be considered within the context of the services that are used and provided to and used by people in that area, the contribution that they make in other ways, not least also the financial impact of a proposed boundary change to the council where that area had been paying rates. That must be considered by the Commission as well. So it is certainly something that the Commission is very aware of, and something that it would consider when it's making its call about the recommendations that it would make, but it's not in itself a reason for proposing a change from one council to the other. And that also recognises that, councils make their own decisions about rates and have a lot of flexibility to do so, both across their council area as a whole and also in how they're applied to different areas in the council. So, that's ultimately going to be in any council's hands, whether it's the council that an area is currently in or an area that it could possibly move to in the future.
So each year, council reviews its rating policy and can adjust the differential rate and also the rate in the dollar. Yeah, so there's different differential rates. So there's industrial, there's vacant land, there's residential, There's residential rural for Gawler, and I can't remember a commercial. And there's different kinds of commercial. There's a tiered rating system within the commercial rating system and so the council has that flexibility to review that, and they have to every year.
So I think, so your question is really, you're trying to understand the impact of like if you were to change council areas, what that rate of change might be.
It's going to affect my pocket.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we've got an answer to that.
The gentleman up there said I'm going to pay maybe
Sure.
$100 more. Well,
I'm not sure he said $100.
What am I going to get for my $100? Everyone wants to know.
Sure.
You know.
I think the Mayor's going to respond to that.
Yeah, I'll attempt to. So, and it's tricky because every year we review the rating policy, and every year we have the opportunity to change those rates in the dollar. So my thoughts would be listening to your feedback. If these areas came into Gawler, we'd certainly need to look at a broad ranging rate review to take into consideration any recommendations if it got to the point where it was proclaimed, and also understand the impact. For example, you wouldn't want a situation where you paid 50% more rates, purely because of the fact that you've come into the Gawler council area. Council would need to seriously consider that and look at their rating policy. So that would be my view as Mayor, that we would have an equitable look across the area at the rating policy, rates in the dollar, differential rates.
I'm just going to go to a question here, and then back to you, Shirley.
Yeah, my name's Alan Miles. I'm a multiple ratepayer of Light, Gawler and Playford and the District Council, Wakefield, and others. I've just picked up on your comment, Henry, about 330,000 comparing rates. My point is, most of the places in Gawler, Belt and Hewitt are far in excess of 300,000. So I take a problem comparing a rate of 300,000 when we all know that is far under what is actually the value of the properties. Can you explain why you are not talking about 500 or 600,000?
Well, I use that reference as an average, just for the purposes of assisting in the conversation. Then I did look at a property value comparison of 450,000. So I'll just use both those examples to assist in the response. But I accept that there's a whole raft of valuations and a whole raft of rates that are applicable.
Thank you. I'll come to this lady here. Thanks, Paul.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Kirsty. I'm in Evanston Park. I'm one of the 9 properties that pays Gawler and Playford council rates. My question's around the Hills Face Zone, and I'm aware that Gawler Council currently doesn't have a Hills Face Zone in the development plan, and that Playford does. So if we transfer to Gawler, what does that mean for us? And are we still in the Hills Face Zone, which comes with development issues? And for example, the Hills Face Zone, under that, we're not required to get mains services. I'm not a mains water. If I'm no longer in that zone, does that mean I have to get mains water supplied?
The boundary change proposition wouldn't affect the land use zoning proposition in terms of any changes in the first instance. It'll be a like for like change is what I would expect the town of Gawler would be pursuing. However, in saying that, the whole planning system is changing at the moment. The state government is turning the planning system upside down and classifying and reclassifying land categories from a whole raft of different perspectives. And given that we know that the council boundary changes are a complex process, my recommendation to council would be, depending if we proceed any further, would be that it's a like for like proposition. So although we don't have a Hills Face Zone in our council area, if we do change the boundary, in the first instance, we will have a Hills Face Zone.
Thanks, Henry. Shirley, did you have another question? Yep. Paul will come over with the microphone.
Thank you. I know at last week's meeting, you were asked on what the cost of this process was, and I fully understand why you cannot actually give us a dollar figure. I did notice in council's documents that they're budgeting for around about $270,000 for this process at this stage. My question is, if the boundary changes do happen, is Gawler needing to pay compensation to the councils where they take their land? And how would that be worked out?
Thanks, Shirley. Good question, Alex. That's
Yes,
one for you, I
thank
think.
Yes, and we got quite a number of questions about this last week as well. There is has been commented quite a lot in publicly that if the Commission recommended that an area move, that the council that would gain the area would pay compensation. It's not quite so straightforward. I think last week when we were talking, I said to one gentleman who was here, it's not like a Louisiana purchase where, you hand your check over and you get some land. However, one of the things that the Commission has to very carefully consider is what does it mean for two councils when areas that have assets and infrastructure move from one council to another, and recognise the circumstances in which that might happen, and set up what may be necessary to ensure that that is dealt with fairly. So again, this is not a comment on anything that you may have on a map in front of you tonight, but a very hypothetical example. If a council had just built a large and expensive library, to take a random example, in that area, and had taken out some borrowings to do so, and then that asset moved from that council to another council, would be reasonable to expect that that liability would probably move too. So that's a very hypothetical example, so that is something that the Commission would have to have a full understanding of, which is essentially about the financial impact of moving one area from one place to another, and how that can be managed so that it doesn't have too much of a negative impact on the council that might be losing that area, for want of a better word. But I would not describe that as compensation per se, because that sort of implies that there's an equation there that councils have to pay a bill to, pay a fee to get an area, or that every area might require that, whereas that's probably not the case. It would have to just recognise the particular circumstances of what's in that area at the time that it may transfer.
Paul, we might come to the front and then back to Cody. Thanks.
Hi, Sam. I live in Evanston South. I just wanted to clarify, was it mentioned in the last meeting how much the process cost to council?
We don't have a number to put on that, because of course it will depend on whether Gawler puts the proposal in, what that proposal ultimately contains, and whether the Commission agrees to investigate it or not, and then finally what the Commission feels that it must fully understand to make good recommendations to the Minister. I think all of your presence here tonight and last week as well indicates that this is not a matter to be taken lightly, that it's not a matter of three people sitting in a room and shutting the door and rolling the map out and going, right, let's make a call, that they have an obligation to fully understand all of the implications of a decision that they will make ultimately on what they recommend to the Minister. So having said that, if a proposal comes in of this size, that yes, that could be quite a piece of work, which is why we're clear that when we have an estimate of how much that is at the end of those 4 whats and whethers, that it will come back to the council, and then they will make their own decision as to whether that is something that they wish to invest in or not.
Sorry I just wonder if you could clarify further, just because a dollar figure was mentioned of 270K. So just, I don't know, if you can clarify any further, if that number is picked out of the air or if it has any substance.
I understand, and Henry may wish to comment on this further, that that's what Gawler has penciled against it. I really don't want to put a number to it because I just don't think I'm in a position to, but I think that the council is sensible in considering that it would be a fairly substantial sum. It's, it's not going to be $10,000, I think it's fair to say. The other thing to remember that, as I said earlier, this is a very new process. So one of the challenges of this, we don't actually have something to compare it to because there has been, pretty much no boundary changes in South Australia for 20 years. So because of this, and because if Gawler's proposal does come in, there is another council also in metropolitan Adelaide considering a boundary change, but they're the first cabs off the rank. So it's very difficult for at the moment because we don't have a comparable process to point to as a point of comparison to make that estimate as well.
Thanks, Alex.
So, yeah, well, as you were saying, we haven't had much in the last 20 years to compare to or to say this is how they make decisions. So I was just wondering if you had any insight on these sort of priorities in terms of what they're looking for, because obviously the proposal itself talks about, communities of interest and all of that kind of thing. Is that going to be the primary concern, or like, how is it going to be rated against, things like, oh, there's community feedback or rates, or like, do you have any clue of how that's all going to sort of work out in that way?
Yes, the legislation requires the Commission to look at proposals in relation to a number of things. They are quite broad. So as I said earlier, there's what we call the Section 26 principles, because they're listed in Section 26 of the Local Government Act. That they broadly describe what you would consider to be a community of interest, but they do have a number of matters in them. Uncoincidentally, I have them in front of me here. So, for example, they're talking about a council should be in a position to provide services, to facilitate development, that changes should benefit ratepayers, that a council should have a sufficient resource base to fulfil its functions fairly, effectively and efficiently. So obviously that's something that they must be mindful of when they're considering the impact of a boundary change on another council as well. There is also specific requirements in the Act for the Commission alongside those principles to consider other things as well. Financial implications and the impact of resources on all councils, the view of the people who are affected by the proposal, and the extent of the support by any affected council, which is, both the council making the proposal and the council that's affected by them. But I think it's fair to say that the Commission does have those matters they must consider, which is why they always take that step when a council or any other body is thinking of making a proposal or providing that feedback, whether that proposal is in the right ballpark or not. But they are quite broad. And I think that also reflects the nature of council boundaries, that determining where a best place for a council boundary to be is by necessity fairly complex. There's a lot of things to consider, and the Commission needs to be in a position where it can consider all of those things, particularly for a more significant change. It's always very tricky to get council boundaries in the right place, but neither are they random. There is an expectation, I think, that council boundaries do create that broader community of interest, which is an expression that's often used and hard to define, but I think in general it would describe an area that has commonalities, both in its geographic location, in the way that it uses services and facilities, in a range of other ways, and that's essentially what the Commission will ultimately consider.
Thanks, Alex. Sure, I'll let Paul come with the microphone. When you say throw, does that mean it's a curly one? Thanks, Paul.
Okay, thank you very much. And my name's Lee. I'm from the Gawler Belt. I love your maps, but I would love to see a map that shows me roads. Nowhere on those maps does it show a road name. I know in the format here that Noddle Road will be a boundary. I live on Noddle Road. And what worries me is, are we going to be treated like a loaf of bread in this whole situation? You get a crust at each end of this loaf of bread, but nobody wants that crust. So all you want is what's in the middle, because you are an urban council. Are you prepared to look after rural councils? We are rural. We've got 10 acres. And like my previous speaker, my valuation is a hell of a lot more than $40,000. My valuation this year is $600,000. And we fought for many years, Light Regional Council, to give us rural living rating. They wanted to put everything in as township living and charge a massive amount in the dollar. I know how the rating system works. I was in the council office for 12 years myself. So I know how it all works. I know the value of general, but we're worried like blazes that we are going to get what we get from Light Regional Council at the moment is just get pushed away. We went to a meeting months ago that was considering stormwater from Roseworthy, and the speaker stood up and said, but that's only 4 houses that it's going to be affected. We don't care about that. Man, we're one of those 4 houses. I bought this property because I've got animals and I have to have my 10 acres. I'm sure Mayor Redmond would love me to bring my horses, my goats and my alpacas and stick them in a block in Gawler. I'm pretty sure I'd get told to leave the gate open and don't let it hit you on the backside on the way out. That's why we're where we are. But I look at that area and it's all rural area. Everybody out there's got 5, 10 or 2.5 acres. And I would hate to see that area destroyed or neglected. So is Gawler prepared to take on rural areas rather than urban as they are at the moment?
Thank you for the question. At the last session, I made the comment about the amount of urban land in Gawler that is zoned for residential development that's vacant. And I put to the audience that we have about 10 to 15 years of supply. And we still have land that's deferred urban, so even more supply of urban land. And as I made the comment earlier to the question about zoning relative, land use zoning relative to boundary changes, and the council's clear position at this point, and what I would be presenting to council for its deliberation is that the council boundary conversation is not confused by the land use zoning and boundary conversation, and that would be pursuing a like for like proposition. So that's what I'll be presenting, and it's for then council to make its deliberations moving forward, but it is a like for like proposition.
Thanks, Henry. Other questions or clarifications? Sam.
Henry, you mentioned in opening address about stormwater management. Now, in the documentation that Gawler has presented, you talk about a major risk which is unknown about flooding Gawler Belt. You also mentioned that you're part of the Gawler and Surrounds Stormwater Management Plan. This plan was due to be released in 2019-20 financial year. We're now at the end of the first quarter of 2020-21. Where is this plan? Can you give us an update on the status? It is seen as a major risk by Gawler.
Well, flood management is a risk, but it is also an opportunity. The town of Gawler has been active in working with its adjoining councils to look at stormwater management from a complete catchment perspective. As I understand, that particular stormwater study is due to be completed shortly. And it's another example that council boundaries don't really mean much when we're talking about stormwater and traffic management and a whole raft of other things. And so I put to you that the town of Gawler has been very active in the area of regional collaboration with stormwater management, stormwater studies. Yes, it's a challenge. Stormwater management is a challenge. It's a challenge now in the town of Gawler, and it's a challenge in all the adjoining council areas. And I think boundary reform will make it more efficient for one council to progress, the outcomes of those stormwater management plans will be, which will need to be pursued over the coming decades.
Is there a follow-up?
We can argue about that later. So you're telling me it's shortly. You've got no date?
So you're talking about in terms of when the stormwater management plan is going to be prepared?
Look, I need to take that on notice in terms of exactly when the study's due. I do know that our engineering department is actively involved in a number of stormwater studies, but I'm happy to get your details and get back to you on that.
Thanks, Henry. We'll take that on notice. Gentleman over here. Thanks, Paul.
I've just got one question that I've got to ask for the Commission. What I'm hearing here tonight, there seems to be a bit of a disconnect that I'm hearing between the Gawler Council and the Barossa Council. So my question is, because there's disconnect, how will the Commission address this issue going forward? And what I'm hearing here tonight, we're only seeing what's happened here tonight. Is there something going forward or some criteria that we can pick up on that lets us know, you know, what the actual state of play is, if there's opposition more against than there is for? The second thing, a question I have is, I'm also hearing, and this is my greatest concern, is that there was supposed to be some developer that had some dealings with the Gawler Council, which I believe was mentioned here that they're looking at. And I believe it was also mentioned that this developers also had discussions with the Barossa Council. Now, will the Commission review that we have a developer playing both ends against the middle to try and get the best deal for themselves?
I think if the Gawler Council decides to put a proposal in, as I said, the Commission must understand the views of the councils and the communities affected by it. It's pretty clear that I think on any given boundary proposal, not all councils are going to agree to it. I would say that if the councils did agree, that it would have been resolved probably 15, 20 years ago. We now have a situation where one council can put a proposal forward for consideration. But it's really important, as I said, that the Commission does its own work in that regard, that it doesn't receive a report from any initiating council. And I mean this as no comment on Gawler Council or any council that might put a proposal forward. But that's not enough for the Commission to make its own decision. It's got to undertake its own work to understand those views. The criteria that it will use, as I said, are the broad principles in the Act and also their own guidelines that spell out how they would do that. But yes, they would absolutely closely engage with all the affected councils and communities to understand what the views are, what the problems are that are raised, and all of those matters. In relation to that particular developer, it's a bit hard for me to comment on that, I'll have to say. Of course, the Commission must understand what the land use is within the areas that are affected, within the area that's proposed to be moved and surrounding it, and what that's likely to be. But I wouldn't want to comment on what a developer may or may not be saying to either council. That body would, of course, be very welcome and likely invited to put its views forward to the Commission as part of that more general consultation.
And just part of that question, though, is about keep understanding the outcomes of, I guess, the consultation process like this and any reporting going forward. What does that look like? Is anyone able to comment on that?
Well, all the information that Council has worked through and reports to Council are all on our website. All future reports will be public, and the outcome of the consultation process will be considered. That will refine the next phase of our considerations and then the possible submission to the Commission. And then the Commission takes carriage of that next phase, which is the investigation, if that's where we go. And then there's another round of consultation accordingly. So as Alex mentioned earlier, this is very much the start of the conversation.
I should also note that the Commission has a pretty strong commitment to publicly releasing what it receives. So its website now contains, it publishes correspondence that gets to and from councils on potential proposals. So there would be an expectation that it'll release things as it goes as much as it can as well.
It seems clear that the Commission can't yet give Gawler Council a real estimate of the cost of the Commission's inquiries. But it also seems that this is sort of a test run for everybody. And quite often government departments, when things are being tested, when processes are being tested, they're quite generous about fee waivers with test cases. I wonder whether the Commissioner had thought, because this is a fairly substantial, fairly significant potential application, whether the Commission might be in a position to consider either a fee waiver or a fee reduction for Gawler Council, as we're the first to try it, possibly.
Do you want to take that as a comment, Alex?
Well, I respect your effort. I should say, though, just to channel my inner bureaucrat, that's actually just my outer self as well, that it's actually in the Act. So the Commission doesn't actually have a lot of choice there. It's not up to the Commission whether the initiating council pays for the investigation. It's in the Act. So that's pretty sad.
That means lobbying the Minister, not the Commissioner, doesn't it?
Yes, you're quite right. If the Minister initiates a proposal, then the government pays for it. So that is always open to any council to request the Minister to initiate a proposal on their behalf. Whether the Minister would do so or not, I think, you know, to be frank, would be in light of the fact that it is open to the council to do it for themselves, though.
Sorry, just finalising, because this is sort of a sphere of experience. The Minister may well also be in a position to waive the Commission's fees without being the applicant. I'm just saying this, Henry.
I don't believe so. I'm not going to give you a definitive answer on that. I can't give you legal advice, not least because I'm not a lawyer. But ministers are usually bound by the Act, as is every other party. So I think if there was a desire to have that arrangement, then the Minister would have to be the initiator.
Thanks, Alex. Gentleman here, thanks, Paul.
Further to the gentleman that asked the question about Hewitt and whether Gawler had interest in it before, as a person vitally involved with Hewitt, I can assure you that the Gawler Council was vitally involved with Hewitt right from a period when the Labor government under Don Dunstan brought out a planner called Mr. Hart, and he developed a concept called the Greater Gawler concept. And as part of that process, much of the work for upgrading the water infrastructure was already undertaken and completed. This was virtually one of the things that, and also the Gawler Council was very supportive of the Hewitt area at that time. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or clarifications? Margaret?
So within the whole of the Calbeeba area, it's, I know in particular myself, I'm rural living 1, but I've got an acre and a half. And the Barossa Valley did an infill survey asking all the residents within Calbeeba area whether they wanted to have smaller blocks, and the majority of people said no. So I want to know, if you take over the Calbeeba area, that you're not likely to start going below an acre and a half.
Yep. As I mentioned earlier, it's a light for light proposition. So if your land is zoned rural living or rural and your minimum size allotment is X hectares, then there's no proposal, nothing on the books, no thinking forward to change anything. It's a light for light proposition. And we would strongly, the town of Gawler would strongly have regard to all of the recent conversations that community had with the Barossa Council in then re-engaging with the community to make sure that's correct and that there are no other thinking, but very much a light for light proposition.
Thanks, Henry. Are there any other questions or clarifications? You can leave, of course. Sorry, I'll get Paul to come over. Thank you.
Big hypothetical question to the Gawler guys. what happens at the next council election if all you guys get kicked out and we have a brand new council elected? Is this going to still stay in place, or could they move quite openly that, no, we don't want any of this, we're going to move, that we scrap it and it's all over? I have seen it in the country council when I was in council years ago, that the whole council was made up of chalkies. 6 elected members moved in, sat on council, buggered up the council, put all the rates up, disrupted everything. Then at the end of their 12-month period, walked out and said, thank you very much. So it's all this going to be set in concrete to the point where if you guys get kicked out, is it still going to happen?
That's always an option. That's always, you get new elected members around the table, they can make a different decision. That's democracy.
Thanks, Mayor Redmond. Any other questions? All right. Oh, last one.
You said it's like for like the rating system. Is that actually documented, or is that just, you know, we'll agree with it, but then something will happen and we'll forget it? Is it documented in a legal document that that's how it's going to be, or it's somewhere down the track it just fizzles out?
I reference like for like relative to the land zoning position, and in terms of is that documented, I'm pretty sure we've documented that in the previous reports to council, but again, this community consultation process and this session and last week's session, and I'm sure in the submissions, well, I know in the submissions are raising the question of land use zoning, and I'll be putting to council quite strongly that it would be and it should be a like for like proposition moving forward.
That's not open. That just goes on and on. There's no cut-off date where it's going to transition to something else later. Is it like for like forever, or?
Well, no, it'll be like for like for the purpose of the boundary reform process, and then subject to what happens with the boundary reform changes. And let's say hypothetically that the Gawler Belt is within the Gawler area, well, it will consider, like it does all its land use zoning categories and planning policies and so forth over particular cycles of time, in its normal reviewing processes, whether those areas should be retained for residential or commercial or such other category, and then that would be a process that the elected members would go through.
It's only like for like till something else happens. Is that what you're saying, or?
Well, all that I can put to you is that as part of the boundary reform considerations and council's decision-making points, I would be strongly recommending that the land use zoning is not changed as part of that process, that it's a like for like proposition. Well,
I think Henry's answered that, but I'd also, if I may, just add a couple of things, that it would, even if Town of Gawler wasn't going through this boundary reform proposal process, your land could be subject to rezoning by your own council at some time, subject to consultation and a range of other factors. So,
or even ministerial changes,
Correct.
which happened in Gawler East. That was the minister that changed that. So other people can change it. Yeah. So other governments can change it. Ministers can change that. We know that, but that's separate that's a separate process. And as Nicole said, that could happen in any time. And developers can change as well. So yeah, subject to that.
but as part of this proposal, I think you're confirming like for like in terms of zoning at this point in time. Yep. Yep. Over here. Hello. Of course. Beg your pardon?
Gawler Belt's in the food production area. So the council's got limited.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of, well, any of those types of things, again, like for like, they'll still apply during this proposal change. Alex?
Ministerial, not council.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep.
I should just clarify that the Boundary Commission doesn't have the power to rezone land. It's, you know, it's just not within its remit. So it would not say, it would not be in a position to say the boundary should change and the zone should change. That's a separate process. That power is held by separate bodies, and actually a different minister would make that call. So it would be aware of what the zones are, but it certainly doesn't have the power to change the zone if a boundary change would go ahead.
Thanks for that. That's good clarification. If there are no other questions or clarifications, I might talk about what's next. I'll give you one last chance. Anyone got a burning question? No? Oh, one more. Sorry, down the front. Paul's come. I'll let him use the microphone.
I wasn't at the first meeting. I was just wondering if there was anything significant that came up that you think would also be useful for everyone here. Maybe a question that, yeah, would be helpful. Or if not, maybe some of the areas that haven't really been talked about tonight. If there's anything important or controversial or whatever that might be useful for us to know.
That's a good question. I might answer if I'll kick off. Is that all right? So in terms of things that sort of got covered or asked about last Monday, very similar, just sort of less questions. There was a lot more about process, quite a lot about process, particularly getting heads around this is just the start. And the town of Gull goes through this starting process, this starting conversation to even decide whether it's going to pursue putting something to the Boundary Commission, and then the Boundary Commission essentially doing this investigation. So there's a lot of stuff around that, wasn't there, Alex? A lot of detail. There were some similar sort of questions or comments about how rates might change around the costs of the process. That was probably it really, wasn't it? There was just a lot about process, I think, overall, and just, yeah, concerns, I guess, or questions around will my rates change, similar to what we've heard here tonight. Did you want to add, Mayor Redmond or Henry? Was that fair summary? In terms of your other questions, is there anything else you should know? I'm in your hands.
It's also on the live stream on YouTube, so you can go and actually watch the whole thing from last week if you want, further insight.
Good reminder, definitely. It's on the council's website if you want to go watch that recording. All right, I might talk to you about what's next. So very clearly at the start of the process, council uses the conversation it's had with people like yourselves here tonight, last Monday night. There's also an online survey. Feel free to go to the iPads here tonight if you haven't already done the online survey before you go, or go to council's webpage and you'll find it there as well to complete that. But in terms of the consultation process, it closes on the 7th of October. Council will review that feedback and provide a summary report to the council for consideration with a decision on the 3rd of November. And then, of course, if the council decides to proceed, then it puts in that proposal for change to the Boundary Commission. And then, of course, the Commission, as Alex has described, goes on to assess that. As I mentioned, there's a variety of ways for you to continue to input. You can write a written submission. You can hand that in at any one of council's centres to the Civic Centre. You can email it direct to council. You can go complete the online survey, but you can also make a verbal representation at the special council meeting on the 3rd of November. So if you feel that you want to stand up and say a few more words about what you think about the proposal, whether you support it, what you like about it, what you don't like about it, you can attend that council meeting on the 3rd of November. And there's a range of details up there. Feel free to take a photo of that if you'd like to know all of those. But all of the information is available on council's website around all of the things we've spoken about tonight. There's even a range of links to documents that Alex referenced, like which I have read, the guidelines that the Boundary Commission has released to preparing a proposal. So if you do want to go into more detail about what's involved and what the steps look like, etc., there's a range of information about that, as well as some other things that council has submitted to the Boundary Commission over time. So with that, I think we've come to the end of tonight's session. I'll remind you that we have got information here. Feel free to pick it up as you leave, which is some more detail about the different areas proposed for inclusion or removal from the town of Gull. A reminder, please feel free to stick any post-it notes on our big posters about what you do like about the proposal or what you don't like. So we've heard a variety of views tonight, both for and against what people think about the proposal. I'd also like to say a special thank you to our panellists, particularly Alex, who came tonight on annual leave. Thank you again, Alex. That's been really helpful to help us understand the Boundary Commission's role in the process. Thank you to Mayor Redman, and thank you to Henry Innett for being here tonight. And of course, thank you all for coming out tonight. A reminder that if you want to rewatch tonight's events, the live stream will be available on the website in a couple of days, I believe. And also any questions on notice, we'll be coming back to people with responses around that as well. So other than that, thank you for coming along, and wish you all the best in the process. Good night.